Welcome, brave souls, to Fear File Chronicles, your one-way ticket to spine-chilling stories and terrifying tales. Tonight, we'll be diving into the darkest corners of the human mind with the story, Where the Birches Lean, penned by the twisted mind of Locked 334. Together, we'll explore the unexplained and face our deepest fears. But before we begin, if you enjoy trembling in terror, be sure to hit that like button, share this video with your fellow fear fanatics, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to click the bell notification so you never miss an eerie episode. Your support truly means the world to us, so feel free to leave a comment below to join the Fear File Chronicles community. Now, without further ado, let's unravel the mysteries of the unknown together as we delve into tonight's fear-inducing story, Where the Birches Lean. Dim the lights and prepare yourself for a chilling journey into the Fear File Chronicles. It was the last week of school before Christmas break. That meant that the students and teachers of Ridgecrest Christian Preparatory Academy had little intention of actually working. Most classes had become a social hour, but Mr. Winthrop had decided to take this opportunity to give his senior English class a writing assignment. He requested that each student write a 2-page essay detailing their holiday traditions. The class groaned in their displeasure. All of them, except the golden boy, Jeremy Bascom. Jeremy Bascom was perfect. Perfect blonde hair, blue eyes, and a pearly white smile. The kind of boy you wanted your daughter to date. Jeremy would credit this to being perfectly made by his Lord and Savior. His one annoying quality was the need to remind everyone of his faith and the pitfalls of anyone who did not believe in it. Jeremy and his small group of like-minded friends were quick to correct anyone who thought different and enjoyed any opportunity to spread the message of their faith. He was a walking and talking reminder of what it meant to be Christian. Everything about him showed it, all the way down to the golden cross that was permanently pinned to his polo shirts. So, when given the task of writing about the reason for the season, Jeremy was more than enthused. He did have one question, however.
What should those of us write about who do not celebrate Christmas?
Jeremy remarked while glaring across the room toward the pale and dark-haired girl sitting in the corner. Emma Campbell responded with a sneer and a raised middle finger. It was no secret that Emma did not believe in God. But teenage rumors had spread that she practiced the dark arts of witchcraft. The truth was, the only thing Emma knew of spells and magic were the stories her grandmother had told her of the old days in Scotland. As a child, she would sit, her green eyes wide as her ancestor told of the Druids performing rituals to summon the power of their gods. Her favorite was one of justice, a humble servant saved from torture by the power of the gods, having turned their assailant into a simple birch tree. She would beg her grandmother to tell the story, and each time, her grandmother would assure her that the place full of birches was real. Emma had never actually witnessed magic, though. It was only day-to-day rituals that her mother still performed out of habit. There was always incense burning and a blessing before the day would begin, the type of thing that was hardly any different than lighting a candle or saying a prayer. The only reason Emma even attended a Christian school was the academic benefit it afforded. She contemplated her grandmother's many stories and began writing. If Mr. W. wanted to know about tradition, she would write about the winter solstice as she had been taught. Mr. Winthrop had to calm the chuckles of his class before answering,
"Everyone has traditions, not just Christians, and I am interested in reading about all of them. So please give me your best work."
When the bell rang to signal the end of the period, the room went from silent scribbling noise to a clamor of shuffling seats. Mr. Winthrop raised his voice in an attempt to remind them all that the assignment would be due before each of them left for the holidays. Few of them were paying any attention, however. Emma was the last to exit the room, much like always, and quietly navigated between the hordes of teenagers within the hall. When she approached her locker, Jeremy Bascom and his goons had congregated around it. She sighed, knowing that she would have to endure a lecture to gain access to her belongings. Jeremy's smirk made her sick, despite how perfect his teeth were.
Please, just let me get to my locker.
Emma begged. Jeremy leaned forward.
First, let me see what you are writing for Mr. W's class.
Emma's eyes rolled as she felt her notebook pull free from her hands. She yelled for it to be returned, but the group had quickly surrounded Jeremy. They hovered over the pages and read about a celebration of the winter solstice. A joyous time of giving, decoration, and feast. Emma had been taught long ago that many of the Christian traditions had been borrowed from pagan ones and adapted to form what we know as Christmas. She watched as Jeremy's face changed from amusement to anger with each passing word. Emma knew that within Jeremy's mind, she was a sinner, a blasphemer, and doomed to the pits of hell. She could even see it in his eyes when he finally looked at her.
God does not like it when we spread lies, especially about him,
Jeremy said as he began tearing the pages from Emma's notebook.
They aren't lies. They are stories my grandmother used to tell me.
Emma roared back. The girl refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She held strong to the tears that wished to flow from her eyes as her notebook was shoved back into her hands. This was something Emma had become accustomed to. The group dispersed as the next bell rang, and though she should have made her way to class, her heart was no longer in it. Instead, she made her way to the restroom and sat within a stall to release her sorrow, drop by drop into her palms. In that tiny space, she found herself beseeching the gods of her grandmother to save her from his pain. Emma hoped that the god of revenge Iran could come swooping in and teach Jeremy Bascom a lesson. That night, Emma's sleep was restless. Her mind was still filled with the tortures of the day and wishes of a solution. It took her hours to find peace, but once she had, she also found dreams. She found herself walking among stark white birch trees. A pale blue gown of cotton and lace draped over her thin frame, and lilies sat like a crown upon her head. The air was warm and sweet. The birds chirped overhead, and the wind played a tune that reminded her of the music her grandmother used to play. Soon, she found herself amidst a clearing, and within the center sat two ghostly-looking hounds with bright red ears. They sat intent, watching as she approached them and made no movement toward her. From beyond the trees, a figure appeared in black. A hood covered scattered strands of gray as the person hobbled upon a cane toward the clearing. As the person stopped beside the dogs, a frail and withered hand pushed back the hood to reveal the wrinkled and worn face of an old crone. Her eyes were glassy, much like that of the sightless, but she stared intently at Emma as if she were peering into her very soul. The woman gave a gentle smile and reached out her hand to brush at Emma's cheek. The woman's smell was of fresh grass, and the sensation was calming. She felt like a child again, being soothed by her grandmother when she was in pain.
Young one, do not despair. We see you.
The woman spoke softly. A tear rolled from one of Emma's eyes as she spoke.
Who are you?
A friend of your family, dearie. You may call me Matilda.
Is this the place my grandmother told me about?
Matilda nodded.
This place is full of magic, and if you believe, you will witness it.
And with those words, small specks of light erupted from the flowers beneath Emma's feet. They danced within the air around her body, and a sound like tiny voices singing echoed in her ears. It was soft and soothing, like a lullaby. Her eyes began to flutter, and her knees became weak. Emma knelt within the soft grass and found herself laying down within the poppies. The sweet smell of the flowers, the calming song, and the comforting ground beneath her lulled her to sleep. Her body lay still while the old crone and her hounds disappeared into the birches beyond the clearing, humming a tune from a time long since past. Emma did not stir the rest of the night, and a smile rested on her lips. The following day, Emma felt rejuvenated. It was almost as if every weight of the world she lived in had been lifted from her shoulders. There was even a sparkle in those emerald eyes, a light that not even the heckling from Jeremy and his friends could dim. Their laughter faded into the distance as she thought about her dream. It left the group confused, especially Jeremy. A seed of curiosity was planted at that moment. Jeremy had to know why Emma seemed so at peace. Before he had completely thought about his actions, his feet were moving. He picked up the pace until he was walking in stride with Emma.
What's got you in such a good mood?
He quizzed. Emma smirked.
Wouldn't you like to know?
She disappeared into her biology class, and when Jeremy followed, Mrs. Simmons stopped him and questioned if he might be lost. Jeremy did not share this class with Emma. As she took her seat, she gave a slight giggle at the sight of the boy being escorted from the room. Even if Jeremy had not properly received his punishment for being so cruel, it was good enough to improve Emma's mood. Her notebook was filled with doodles of dancing fairies, flowers, and rows of birch trees. She could not get the image of her dream out of her head, and just thinking of Matilda made her smile, and something about that upset Jeremy. He could not get Emma out of his head. Emma's smile was like an itch Jeremy could not scratch. He was distracted by it for the rest of the day and during his evening meal with his family. Normally, he was enthusiastic about sharing the events of school with his father and mother, but tonight he asked to be excused early. Jeremy changed for bed, hoping that a good night's rest would ease his inner turmoil. But as soon as he shut his eyes, Emma's face awaited him. Her wavy brown hair, sparkling green eyes, and supple pink lips haunted him. He tossed and turned, adjusted his pillows, and fought with his own imagination for hours before finally finding sleep. His mind could not let go of the image, and it slowly crept its way into his dreams. Jeremy awoke, laying in a bed of grass surrounded by poppies. The cool night air whipped through the birch trees that circled the clearing, and the only light was that of the moon above. He brought his body up slightly, resting his weight on his elbows. From the forest beyond, a form approached. As the thin figure stepped out into the moonlight, he recognized Emma's face. She slowly approached, grasping hold of the hem of her pale blue gown. She knelt beside him and whispered his name. He stared at her lips, noticing how red and plump they seemed, almost like an apple. She leaned down, pressing those very lips against his, and he could not resist pressing back into her loving kiss. He could hear singing echo through the trees around him, and specks of light danced around them, shining like tiny stars. It was magical. He felt her hand trail down his body, then come to rest between his legs. His eyes widened as her palm rubbed at the cloth that separated their skin. He knew what he was doing was wrong, but it felt so good. His body reacted in kind, his manhood growing firm under her touch. She smiled at the sensation, then leaned back, retracting her hand in order to pull gently at the bindings that held her gown in place. The cloth lowered to reveal her naked form beneath. Jeremy's mouth hung agape as his eyes trailed her perky breasts and smooth skin. He had never witnessed the female body before, and his excitement only grew. The beautiful young woman before him pulled down upon his pants, revealing his rigidness before taking him inside her. Her body rocked slowly atop his lap, gasping in pleasure. Jeremy laid back upon the soft grass and moaned with every motion. Within moments, he could no longer hold in his ecstasy and released himself inside of her. Emma came to an abrupt halt as she felt his fluids fill her. Her smile slowly crooked into a smirk as she lifted her pale form off of him. She pulled her gown back up over her shoulders and bound the strapping. She bent slightly, kissing Jeremy on his forehead before pressing her index finger to her lips, as if telling him to keep this a secret. Then, just as quickly as she had arrived, she disappeared into the birches. Jeremy was left soaked in his own sweat and juices in the middle of the clearing. He jerked awake to find himself still in his bed. It had all been a dream. He spent the next few moments asking forgiveness for his lustful thoughts and prayed for the strength to ignore them if they were to return. Emma's smile failed to leave her as the rest of the week progressed, and it tortured Jeremy to no end. Every time his eyes fell upon her, all he could think of was his dream and being inside her. He prayed more in the days that followed than he ever had before. He prayed for relief from the torment, but it did not come. When he could stand it no longer, he found his way to Emma's locker and waited. When she arrived to retrieve her things at the end of the day, Jeremy stood tapping his foot impatiently. His hair was a mess. His eyes were dark and almost resembled an addict that had not had his fix in a few days.
Rough couple of days.
She quipped. Jeremy tried to smile.
You could say that.
You mind if I get to my locker?
Emma questioned. Jeremy quickly stepped to the side.
Yeah, sure. So, the thing is, I was wondering if you might want to,
Emma giggled slightly, listening to the stammering of the boy.
Spit it out. I gotta get going.
Jeremy attempted to steel himself, his eyes getting more serious.
Will you go out with me?
Emma could hardly contain her laughter. It erupted from her mouth and echoed through the hallway. She had no words to properly respond. Jeremy attempted to laugh as well, but he could not find humor in his question. He needed her to say yes. He asked again, but she simply ignored the question and closed her locker. Emma made her way down the hall with Jeremy following close behind. Tears formed in his eyes as he began to beg, and at one point he even got down on his knees. The sight was truly pathetic, and when it only offered another laugh from Emma's lips, he became angry. He stood abruptly and grabbed her by the arm and demanded she go out on a date with him.
Take your hands off of her right now!
Mr. Winthrop's voice boomed from down the hall. Jeremy's fingers shot open, releasing his hold on her arm in a second. Emma was shocked at Jeremy's actions, but even more frightened of the look in his eyes. She could see madness behind those eyes. She did not hesitate to step back and head toward the door. Within moments, she was out the door and on her bus. Jeremy was left defeated in the hallway, wondering how he could have been led to this madness. He only had one answer. Emma must have cast a spell on him, and he would have to break it. That was the only way for him to return to sanity and possibly save his soul from damnation. The plot began to form in his head as he exited the building and sat in his car. His tires poured smoke as he peeled out of the parking lot and down the road for home. The next day, Emma had made it a point to avoid Jeremy, which she found to be easy because he had not attended classes that day. She just had to make it until the end of school, and they would be out for the holidays. She could not help but wonder what had possessed Jeremy to act the way he had, and the thought clouded her mind most of that day. She stared at his empty seat in Mr. Winthrop's class, which the teacher noticed. When the bell rang, he asked Emma to stay behind to question her about the incident, but she had fewer answers than even her teacher. Emma had wanted Jeremy punished for how cruel he had been to her all these years. But now she felt as though it had gone too far. Even as much as she had wanted to see him suffer, she still felt pity for Jeremy. When Emma arrived home, her mother was descending the stairs from the attic. Emma flashed her normal smile and asked what her mother had been doing. Normally, cleaning out the house was saved for springtime, but something had possessed her to bring down some items that had been stored away. Dust filled the air as Emma's mother opened a trunk that held the only remaining items that her grandmother had owned. Several of the books that held those stories Emma remembered from her childhood were piled to one side. The rest were tattered garments, and tucked beneath them was an old white jewelry box. Emma knelt by the trunk and pulled things from it with her mother. Her eyes widened as she revealed a light blue gown that resembled the one from her dream.
Your grandmother loved that dress.
Emma's mother beamed. Emma held the garment to her body and noticed it was her size.
Do you think I could keep this?
I don't see why not. There's no way I'm fitting into that thing.
Her mother laughed as she opened the jewelry box. Emma ascended the stairs, her mind set on trying on the dress, slipping out of the worn-out jeans and t-shirt. Her usual school attire. She draped the delicate fabric over her shoulders. With a reach behind her, she secured the straps before stepping towards the full-length mirror by the window. Gazing at her reflection, she felt a radiant smile bloom on her face. She had never felt so beautiful. At that moment, her mother appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame to marvel at the transformation of her daughter into a charming young woman. Upon noticing her mother's admiring gaze, Emma laughed and spun around in the gown. Wiping a tear from her eye, her mother revealed the surprise she held within a jewelry box. A silver necklace, the pendant shaped like a star, held a rune nestled within. This was the very necklace her grandmother always wore, believing it provided her protection, hoping it would offer the same safety to her daughter. Emma's mother secured it around Emma's neck. The girl held the trinket between her thumb and index finger, gently rubbing it, her thoughts filled with memories of her grandmother's kind smile. Meanwhile, a car sat idling across the street. Jeremy Bascom, stationed in the driver's seat, had his eyes glued to Emma's open window. He had observed her change into the dress, each moment only fueling his anger. Feeling tormented, he wasn't sure how much more he could bear. His gaze remained locked on the window, waiting until the lights were turned off, assuring him the household had retired for the night. Exiting his car, he silently approached the front yard, preparing to grab some pebbles to hurl at Emma's window and capture her attention. The tapping sound disrupted Emma's slumber. She had drifted off wearing her grandmother's gown and felt a bit foolish for doing so. The tapping came again, directing her attention to the window. Another tiny pebble collided with the glass pane, causing her to cautiously approach. Jeremy, just about to throw another pebble, spotted her face and greeted her with a wave from the ground. Emma unlatched the window and leaned out.
Jeremy, what on earth are you doing here?
She said, annoyance lacing her tone.
Sorry for coming over so late, but I wanted to apologize for the other day.
Emma rolled her eyes.
All right, apologize and get out of here.
Come on, at least let me apologize face to face.
You're going to wake my parents.
She warned him.
And believe me, you do not want my dad to catch you here.
Please just let me say what I need to say and then I'll leave.
Jeremy pleaded.
Okay, fine.
Emma capitulated.
But go around to the back. They'll hear if I open the front door.
Jeremy's face lit up with excitement as he quickly made his way towards the back porch. Emma, shutting the window, moved towards her door. Pausing for a moment, she examined her reflection in the mirror. Her hand found her grandmother's pendant. She whispered a prayer for protection, hoping that whatever force had kept her safe till now would continue to do so. Stealthily, she crept down the stairs, through the kitchen, and towards the back door. Scanning the porch, she didn't spot Jeremy. Slowly, her fingers disengaged the lock and twisted the doorknob, easing the door open. In the quiet of the night, she called out, but there was no reply.
Jeremy, this isn't funny.
Stepping onto the porch, she noticed the brilliance of the moon.
If you don't cut it out, I'm going back inside.
Her sentence abruptly cut off as a cloth-covered hand clamped over her mouth. A strong chemical smell invaded her senses, causing her head to spin. Her limbs went weak, and she slumped back into Jeremy's arms. His muffled words faded as she saw his disturbing grin before everything went black. Unconscious, she saw her grandmother in a vision, whispering to her, urging her to be strong, and reminding her of the Birches. Awakening, Emma found her mouth bound shut with a piece torn from her gown. Attempts to scream proved futile as the unfamiliar trees around her swallowed her cries. Jeremy had apparently transported her deep into the wooded area behind her house, where no one would hear her at this hour. Tears began staining her cheeks as she pondered the unknown dangers that awaited her with Jeremy. He cursed loudly, halting abruptly. Emma scanned the surroundings, hoping he had spotted another person in the woods. That's when she noticed the stark white rows of birch trees. Jeremy continued forward, carefully avoiding the ghostly trees. In no time, he found himself in a clearing, the only illumination coming from the full moon above. A field of poppies lay spread out before him, and it didn't take long for them to realize where they were. Emma had never known such a place existed behind her home, as she had never ventured this deep into the woods. She hoped the old woman from her vision would appear to save her, but her hopes dashed as Jeremy roughly dropped her to the ground. She attempted to cry out for help, but Jeremy's hand quickly silenced her. He seemed frantic, his eyes scanning the area as if he were looking for something. Frustrated at not finding what he sought, Jeremy turned to Emma.
What did you do to me?
She tried to reply, but the gag prevented her. Her eyes, swollen from constant crying, pleaded for help. Jeremy approached, his wild eyes revealing his intentions. He fumbled with his belt buckle. Emma quickly realized what he planned to do. Jeremy's pants came down and she attempted to crawl away. In moments, his body was on top of her, his hands reaching for her underwear. The stench of his warm breath filled her nostrils. Jeremy had been drinking. She writhed beneath him, trying to claw at his face in a desperate attempt to fend him off. But he was too strong. Muffled pleas for him to stop came from behind her gag.
You have warped my mind, perverted it. You've torn me away from God's grace.
He spat, his saliva spraying her face.
You're an evil, spiteful witch. It's time you were punished for cursing me with this. You don't deserve salvation.
He growled, his face uncomfortably close to hers. Emma knew she had to act. If she didn't, Jeremy would violate her, and she had no idea what would follow. She clawed at his face, but his knuckles met her mouth in response. Blood from her gums stained her lips crimson, and she screamed in pain. She tried to hold on to her grandmother's gown as Jeremy began to claw at her breasts. She could feel his hardness pressing against her and knew she had little time. Her fingers found the pendant around her neck. She grasped it tightly and thrust it forward. The hard edge of the silver sliced a gash above Jeremy's eye. Blood poured from the wound and he howled in pain. Jeremy staggered back, clutching his forehead and cursing Emma's name. She crawled backward a few feet before removing the gag. She tried to stand, stumbled, and saw Jeremy fall back against one of the birch trees. He tried to prop himself up with one hand, his blood staining the white bark. The anger in his eyes remained, his intentions unwavered. He lunged forward, only to be stopped by his hand that was inexplicably stuck to the tree. Small lights arose from the grass, dancing around the clearing. A melody floated through the air, and Emma suddenly felt safe. Jeremy's blood continued to flow from his wound, down his neck and arm. It seemed to merge with the bark and started fading into it. His blood turned white and rigid, as did his fingers. His skin was transforming into wood, inch by inch. Realizing the truth, Jeremy turned his fear-filled face towards Emma. In response, she spoke words she had never spoken before, but somehow understood. They were in a dialect her grandmother would use when telling her stories.
La cumhacht Arwen, queerid me do, dot fithead, and co lisna crayabhan bead sin.
Help me, please.
Jeremy screamed as his arm melded with the tree. Emma merely turned away from the grotesque sight and looked towards the path they had taken to enter the clearing. The old woman from her vision stood at the edge of the birches with her pale hounds. She placed her finger to her lips, urging Emma to keep their secret. When Emma looked back, all that was left of Jeremy was his other hand, its fingers stretching out in a futile plea for help before being consumed by the white bark. Each digit morphed into small branches of the newly formed tree. It leaned out from the tree beside it, still trying to flee, but to no avail. The deed was done. The tree was indistinguishable from the other birch trees in the area. Emma turned and saw how many similar trees surrounded the area. She wondered if each one represented someone who had crossed her family. Hoping to thank the old woman for her help, she turned back, but the woman and her pets had vanished. Emma, the fair-skinned girl who had narrowly escaped a horrifying fate, slowly made her way back home as the first snowflakes of winter began to blanket the ground. In the months that followed, the mystery of Jeremy's disappearance gradually faded from the public conversation. Authorities simply assumed he had run away. Emma was the only one who knew differently. So when the first green sprouts pushed through the dead leaves of spring, she returned to the woods. Humming an old tune and twirling in the mended fabric of her grandmother's gown, she strolled through the woods. Yellow jackets floated in the warm breeze, and the air smelled of poppies as she skipped through the brush. Her bare feet patted softly on the grass, her skin warmed by the springtime air as she found the clearing. A smile curled her lips as she found the leaning birches. She knelt beside one tree, thanking the gods once again. Well, my friends, we've reached the end of tonight's chilling tale, Where the Birches Lean, by the talented Locked 334. I hope you've enjoyed our descent into darkness, and that you'll carry a piece of the Fear File Chronicles with you as you drift into uneasy dreams. If our story left you shivering and shaking, don't forget to like this video. Share it with others who crave a good scare, and subscribe to the Fear File Chronicles for more haunting horrors. Remember to hit the bell notification, so you're always among the first to know when a new nightmare awaits. As always, we appreciate your support and would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Sharing your fears and frights with us truly means a lot, so don't be shy to engage with our sinister community. Until next time, remember to embrace the darkness, for it is within the shadows that our most terrifying stories are born. Good night and stay scared.